Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring.
Welcome back to Shared Humanity. My name is Nelba Márquez-Greene, and in this podcast and video series, I talk to the humans behind the headlines of gun violence in a moment in history where all too often we discuss everything but. May these stories give you new perspective and empower you to hope and action. Today's guest is Stephanie Melendez. Stephanie is a healthcare professional. She's a mom and a survivor. On August 3rd, 2019, a young person armed with an AR-15 entered a Walmart in El Paso. Radicalized by anti-immigrant and white nationalist rhetoric, he entered with one purpose and one purpose alone: to kill as many Latinos as possible. He murdered 23 human beings, and he physically injured 22. He changed the lives of millions. On that same August 3rd, Stephanie's mom and dad had volunteered to take her eldest shopping. Stephanie's dad, David Johnson, saved the lives of his wife and granddaughter. David was one of the 23 killed at the Walmart in El Paso on a random day in the United States. Stephanie, welcome here.
Thank you.
Stephanie, how is today?
Come a long way since 5 years ago, but every day is still a new day to figure things out.
I think people think, and we talk about this a lot on this podcast series, that healing is linear, that recovery from loss to mass violence is, okay, it's been 5 years. Are you better? How would you answer that question?
I wouldn't say better because it changes your life forever. There is no going back to who you were before that day. Every day's a different day. Every day we have to learn something new. And there's always reminders that our lives have changed, even from something as simple as cooking dinner or going out to a store. Nothing's the same, and everything's a reminder that it's not the same. And so you just kind of learn how to not move on, but move forward, and learn how to cope with all the new, how somebody once told me, is the new regular.
The new regular. I like that because it's certainly not normal in any way, shape, or form. Stephanie, I've known you for a little bit. Do you remember the first day we met?
Yes. Although during that time period, I was still very much in the, is this still a dream kind of phase, where everything was very dreamlike. Nothing really felt real. It was fresh. I can't even remember the month, but it was like pretty fresh after everything happened. And I was invited to New York. And I could not go without my daughter or my mom because we were still very shaken. So we took them, and I just remember walking in and meeting you, and you made me feel comfortable pretty much right away.
Well,
and you kind of stuck with me since.
We have to stick with each other. Let me tell you what I remember. I remember it was weeks after what happened to your family. And I was invited by Gayle King alongside Reverend Sharon Risher and Richard Martinez to go to New York and talk about the long-term impact of gun violence, or what this is really like for families. And at the last minute, they said, and also a person from El Paso is coming. And I thought, oh my gosh, it is so early. I wonder who this is. And I see you, and I see your mom, and I get to meet your daughter, Caitlin, for the first time. And I think, oh my goodness, it is so early. And yet you stood there and you gave your interview and you talked to us about your dad. Can you tell us about your dad now?
Yes, he was a family man. through and through. He raised us with family being priority. He was the rock and the glue of our family. He was a hard worker. I don't really know how to explain him except he was everything. That's it in a nutshell, but I could give you an example. He stepped up. My husband was military when Caitlin was little and had to miss out on quite a bit. My dad stepped up and became that figure for her. He took her to father-daughter dances. He went to school events. He came and picked her up from school. He gave her a room. He was just there. No complaint. Never asked for anything. He was just this amazing role model to all of us.
You talk about him, and I've seen images of what a devoted and loving partner and parent and grandparent he was and is. And to think that there is this element of what happened at that Walmart in El Paso to be motivated by so much hatred just feels, to me, extra painful and sorrowful that this was a reality, that this was, in addition to being an act of mass violence motivated by hatred.
And I think that is still something I struggle to come to terms with, because why? If you've ever been to El Paso, or if anybody's ever heard of El Paso, we are a beautiful city. We're diverse. We're very cultural, very kind. I don't think anywhere else really like El Paso. We've been named safest city several years. And to get that kind of phone call, it's just not something we expected. And then to hear, of course we didn't know about the hate for a while later, but to hear about that, it was why. It was a lot of why.
Yeah. What you Caitlin is now, a little bit older, and you have a younger daughter too. How do you talk to your children about this? How does it come up for them? And how do you as a mom guide them through in age-appropriate ways?
And that's hard. With my oldest, it was something that we were kind of forced to do, just because once she started hearing what was behind it and her being ultimately a target, it was hard for us to explain the whys. Because again, El Paso, we're all very diverse here. You don't really see any of the prejudice here in El Paso, nor do you feel it. And so for her to be told, oh, it's because of the way you look, it was very hard to try to explain that to a 9-year-old and the whys, because she didn't understand. And now she's 14 and asking questions, and us having to say, the rest of the world is a little different, where it's not the same like here. And we have to teach her how to be proud and how to embrace her culture and her heritage. And then as far as my little one, she's barely starting to ask questions. And I'm going to be honest, I struggle with how to say that to a 7-year-old who doesn't really understand. She even told me, so if the bad man didn't go to the store, Papa would still be here. And it's something that I don't know how to explain yet, nor how to do it without hurting them more.
And I'm sure you're not alone in the number of parents, caregivers, and people out there who are trying to explain these kinds of acts that have no easy why to younger generations that will have to live with it. There is no easy why. Stephanie, what has helped you in the days and weeks and months that have gone forward since 2019, what has helped you in your process of healing, and what has helped your family?
Honestly, at first, it's a lot of robotic motions because we're kept so busy on the stuff people doesn't see. You know, the funeral and the paperwork, and there was so much of that going on that I didn't really have time to process really anything. I just wanted to make sure I was there for, you know, my mom, my daughter, and I was just on this mode that just go, go, go. Don't think about it. A lot of resources at the beginning did reach out. There was a lot of people who came out to help El Paso and make sure we got the help we needed. A resiliency center opened, and they offered therapies and people to help us like file paperwork, lawyers, all that kind of things. And it did help because we were just so lost because it's not something you expect. And so as the years processed and I came to terms with, okay, now I need to get help. I did reach out to the Resiliency Center, and they offer, like I said, therapies. I made sure I got myself a therapist. My daughter wasn't already, I had her in therapy from the moment I picked her up from the FBI witness. And so it's been a lot of talk. And then, of course, reaching out to other community members who went through the same thing, finding groups to talk with people who understood exactly what we were going through, what we really not needed to hear, but to show that we weren't alone. Because in those weeks after, you feel so alone because all the media, everything, all they want is the story. And at the end of the day, they leave and you're left there going, now what? You know, I still have to face this every day. So it's been a struggle and we're working on it, but we learned how to cope through making sure we reach out and we talk and we feel comfortable talking with each other. And we also reach out to the other family members that were involved because they understood. And that has helped tremendously when we get together and we talk.
It sounds like having community is
Yes.
incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Also, I'm aware that your family has multiple layers. You lost a family member in an act of mass violence. You also had two survivor witnesses actually in, and we don't talk enough about survivors. So you're actually having your own grief of losing your dad, but then you have a mom and a daughter who were also survivor witnesses to the same incident. I'm quite sure adding complexity to the situation in your home and in your process of healing. And as one of the elements of research here at Yale, the firearm injury prevention, and at so many other schools, they try to actually study what are the things that are helpful to survivors, try to study what prevents acts of mass violence, but also what are the things that actually help families. And that's different for everyone. But if you could distill down very specifically, in the early days, I'm sure it was different than now, but at any point in the last 5 years, can you name an intervention or something that was particularly useful to your family?
You know, that's pretty hard because ours was a little, I guess, different because most of the victims and survivors were older. So they had a lot of resources as far as therapy specialists, people to come in and help. My daughter was only 9 and at the time, and we didn't have those resources. So for me, it was extremely difficult to find a therapist who was trauma informed and who could help. So that took us quite a bit to find that person who she could not only click with and feel comfortable talking with, but somebody who would actually help with the trauma aspect of everything. And the school thing was another thing we had to conquer. Without sounding mean, I think I had quite a bit of trouble in those early days trying to find the help I needed as far as my 9-year-old. My mom had an amazing team that came together because we had those resources here. El Paso isn't a big city like other Texas cities, so she had those resources. And so I had to fight a lot to get the help I needed for my daughter. And because of all that, I had to quit my job, and we had to get out of our house, and we had to sell a car, and it was really, really difficult. While we had tons of community support and from around the world and from our own local, it was still extremely difficult with a child. I think a lot of people forgot that there were children in the Walmart, and it's been just difficult as far as the child aspect of it comes in.
So I'm
Sorry,
hearing...
I was rambling.
No, you're not rambling. This is really important for people to understand. Number one, that even in the best of circumstances, both immediate and long-term recovery and support is complicated. It's a complex issue. And number two, if we're not careful with understanding the actual victim population, that we might exclude supports for children and adolescents if we're focusing all our interventions on an adult population, and vice versa. The more we get to know the population, the more we understand the individual and community needs, the better we're going to respond. All too often, we are very formulaic. We're like, okay, this worked in Sandy Hook, so this is going to work in whatever community. And that's not how it works. Every family is unique. Every community is unique. And yes, there are probably some best practices and learnings we can take to every community. But what I'm hearing from you is not meanness at all. It is clarity. And it is important information for those of us listening who want to help to understand what can happen and how we can do more harm if we misstep. And it sounds like if we miss an entire population, for example, that there weren't supports for children, we could actually make someone's life more complicated or make them feel more alone.
Yes, I think at the very beginning, I kind of felt like she was forgotten because, again, they were amazing in helping my mom, but then I would have to be, okay, now how do I do this with my daughter? Help me with that. And they would be at a loss, and they'd be like, okay, let me look into it for you. And either I never heard back, or I would just have to kind of research on my own, which is how I met even more people. One of your friends actually helped me with the school situation and helped me find, and another friend helped me find a therapist. So it was a lot of fight and work. And at times I did feel kind of forgotten in a sense that, okay, she was there too, and she needs help too. What do I do? Because I was at a complete loss. And I think at that moment as a mom, I felt almost like a failure because I couldn't do anything to help her at that moment.
And that happens a lot. In my experience, after mass violence, when systems fail or are inadequate, individual survivors blame themselves. And it's a natural response. It's a natural response to blame yourself. I've heard this from many guests, if not most of them. I blamed myself. And it's really a response to systemic failure and systemic inadequacy. So thank you for bringing that up. You also brought up the importance of the informal survivor network, right? Where we kind of meet each other at an interview or meet each other at a conference or meet each other on a phone call, meet each other on a Zoom, make connections, and then can be a support to one another. And I really dislike the circumstances of our meeting, but I am incredibly grateful that you are a part of my network. You've talked a little bit about the advocacy for your family and the advocacy for yourself. And I wanted to ask you, every single survivor has a different definition of activism, but all too often, our definition of activism, at least in the United States, is political or policy, community level. What does activism look like for you?
This, just coming forward and talking, helping people understand what it's really like. I've never been a political person. And so that kind of activism for me is difficult because I don't have the full understanding to be that kind of activist. But this is something I can do. I can come forward and I could share my voice and I could talk about our experience. And yes, it's difficult sometimes to talk about it. But in the end, I kind of think of my dad and what would have happened if the situations were reversed and what he would be doing. And I think this is it. He would get out there and talk. And that is the way that I see how to participate in activism.
And what do you hope people learn from your story or take away from the legacy of your dad or from you sharing your experience on what it's like 5 years later or just knowing generally more broadly about the Walmart in El Paso?
You know, it's kind of something my daughter said a long time ago. She's like, I don't understand. We're all the same. Why would somebody do that? And I think that needs to come away. Like, there's no reason. We are all have families. We all just do our best every day. And I think that's what people need to come away from and just don't forget. Because once they start to forget, it just kind of happens again. And it's a circle that just keeps on going.
Do you feel more frightened now, Stephanie, as a Latina?
Oh, yes. I've never had anxiety or anything when it comes to going places or letting my kids go places. I've always kind of been like, okay, go ahead. I would let her go with my parents wherever, and I trusted them fully. And after this, it took me a while. It took her a while too, to be like, okay, should I let her go without me? Or keep your phone on you? Or, that Saturday was the one Saturday she did not have her phone because she didn't clean her room. And as a mom, take the phone. And, and now that's another thing. I'm like, I can't take the phone. All these kind of thoughts kind of into your head, or like we walk into a store and, I see her looking and I find myself looking, where's the exit? And that's not something we should have to think about, especially her, I mean, so yes, it's induced a lot of anxiety as far as just, our city was safe and then suddenly it wasn't, and he wasn't even from here. So that's like a whole other thing. Like, now what do we need to be scared of?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think people understand that fear of the unknown and could it happen again? And in your particular case, race, culture-based violence lives at the same time as hopes and dreams. Caitlin has some pretty big hopes and dreams. She's in a specialized school for young women who are academically advanced, and she has a special school in mind. Would you mind telling us what special school she has in mind for college?
Yeah, she came up to me and she's like, Mom, I think I want to go to Yale. And I was like, whoa. And I am so proud of her for having these big dreams and these big ambitions. I want her to see the world. I want her to get out there and I want her to study where she wants to study. I'm not going to tell her she can't do that. She had to write an essay to get into this school and I wasn't allowed to read it. Parents aren't allowed to read it. But I was like, what'd you write in it? She's like, I can't tell you, but I can tell you I'm not going to take my future for granted. And
It's good.
yeah. And I was like, okay. And so, it is a college preparatory school where they, have to look at different colleges and have to apply. And she was like, I want to go to Yale. I was like, okay, let's work on that. And every Thursday's college day and she wears her Yale shirt. And I want her to have those dreams. And every day I thank my dad for allowing her to get those dreams and be able to have those dreams, because if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have been able to have those dreams. And every day I thank him. And I wish I could tell him that in person, but I know he could hear me somewhere.
I know he can too. And speaking of your dad, in honor of David Johnson, what can we do to remember him, to honor him, or to honor your family? I ask that of every guest. And some people have foundations, some people don't. Some people are activists for a particular thing or belong to a particular group. Some people, the thing they wish for is much less formal. How could we best honor your dad?
Just be kind and don't forget. Take that away from all of this. I don't have any foundations or anything, but we didn't really touch on it, but you've seen that the guardians of the children have helped my daughter a lot.
Tell us more about this. I was hoping you would go there, but only if you wanted to.
Yeah, I talked to them as well to make sure. They are an amazing organization. They are actually international. They are actually a biker organization. They are these men and women who ride motorcycles and wear the leather cuts, and they look intimidating and scary. And their main focus is advocacy for children who have been abused, put through trauma, have to go through court systems, and they stand with them. They are their advocate. They make the world a little bit less scary. And Caitlin, when all this first started, wouldn't leave the house. And it was a struggle just to get her to go to school. And then she meets these guys, and suddenly she's not so scared. Everywhere to this day, she asks, well, can the guardians join? And they're literally just a phone call away. We call them and they're there. And they just give them back a little bit of the safety that they lost. And I couldn't thank them more for everything they have done and continue to do for our family. They are a nonprofit organization. They really do not, I don't think they accept donations, because they do events throughout the year that raise money that goes towards the children. But they are there for anybody who needs help. All they have to do is look up their local chapter, and they are there. And they are an amazing group of people. And they show up in court. They will show up in court, and they will stand behind them. So when they see the person that hurt them, they're not as scared.
Tell me their names again.
Guardians of the Children.
Guardians of the Children. I think it's really important you shared that, because very often people have preconceived notions outside of what is helpful, and that it always looks a certain way. And every person has a thing, or, more than one thing that has been uniquely helpful. I would never have known that story of this organization had you not shared it. And I'm so thankful that organizations like this exist that can make the world less scary for children who have seen or been part of violent events, whether that's domestic violence at home or in their communities in an act of mass violence like in the Walmart where Caitlin survived. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your story. I don't have a lot of words for you because watching your growth from the beginning in those first weeks after the Walmart El Paso to now is extraordinary. But yet I also know that this pain doesn't go away. So I thank you that despite this, you chose to share your story with us, and for that trust. Thank you for listening. Shared Humanity is produced by the Yale School of Public Health. Follow us on social media at Yale SPH and learn more at sph.yale.edu/sharedhumanity. Thank you to the Yale Porvu Center and Yale Broadcast Studio for their support.
Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring.